Hey H&K fans, James here with another video for you today. I thought I would go back to a series that I'd started many years ago with the attempt to provide a very in-depth review of all of H&K's weapons from an armored operator perspective. Kind of fell off from that, but we're going to pick it back up here today to cover the P2000 series. It's kind of funny. I joke quite often about YouTube type videos. You go out there, you search for a specific subject, and it's obvious that the person who's given the video is doing what I call the Wikipedia page review, where they're just reading blatantly off of whatever Wikipedia says about a specific weapon. And in this case, it's actually kind of a funny side note. I don't do that. I don't use that myself. But recently I'd had a customer who had sent me a question about their P2000, and they had linked the Wikipedia page to that in reference to it. So open it up and I'm reading through, and it's vaguely familiar. And I quickly realized that whoever had created the Wikipedia page for P2000 had literally cut and pasted an article I had done on the P2000 series years ago and dropped it in there, to the fact where it even reads at one point where it says and as you can see in this photo, because I had photos in the article. So anyway, we're going to go way beyond a Wikipedia page here today. We're going to cover the history and the background of the company and the weapons that led up to the P2000. We'll talk about it, the different models, all the variants, its unique features and safety designs, and hopefully answer all the questions that you might have about maybe your favorite weapon, and one that I think is arguably the most underrated pistol from within H&K's current catalog. We'll talk about that as well. And I would say even the most ardent H&K fan out there is probably going to learn something they didn't know about the P2000 series video. So with all that said, and without any further ado, why don't you find yourself a comfortable place to sit, grab yourself a tasty beverage, follow me around to the workbench, and we'll dive right in. Okay, so to start talking about a discussion on the P2000 series, we really need to look back to H&K as a company, and where they were at that specific time frame and what they had leading up to it. And in that case, that really brings us to discussing the H&K USP. Now, I've got a very detailed armor operator review on the USP series on my channel. I will link it in the description below, and I highly recommend that you actually go and watch that video first if you haven't seen it before you watch this one, because obviously it goes into the USP, but I'm going to provide a lot more detail into some of the background stuff that H&K as a company does in manufacturing that, just for brevity, I'm not going to go into as great a detail here. So you'll get a much better appreciation for the P2000 by watching that video. But if I was going to summarize the USP up into one sentence, I would say that for H&K, the USP was the revolution. And everything that followed after it, from the P2000, the HK45, the P30, even the VP9, that's just been an evolution of this original design. And for H&K, this was exactly what they needed at exactly the right time. For those of you guys that are old enough to remember, at the release of the USP at the beginning of 1993, H&K, their only other handgun they had was the P7 M series. From 1986 on until this point, it was the P7 M8, P7 M13, and then about the same time frame as the USP came out, the P7 M10. As awesome as those guns are, and you guys who know me know I'm a massive fan of the P7 series, it was not the sales success that H&K needed it to be, especially at this period in the company's time, where they were transitioning, going through a buyout, and changing their manufacturing processes. The P7 series, through its unique manual of arms and functional things, it's kind of too weird for some people to wrap their head around. But more importantly, the price point. At this point in the early 1990s, it was easily twice as expensive, maybe even 3 times expensive, depending on where you were buying it, than a comparable 9mm semi-auto from another company. and H&K was definitely not getting the military and government law enforcement type contracts that they really are focused on from the P7 series anymore. They needed something new. So when the HK USP was developed and hit the market, it was a massive success for the company. It gained them military sales, law enforcement sales, and commercial sales as well. And that pistol, in all of the different models that would follow, carried the company through the 1990s until the end of the decade, when we see a new requirement come out that forced H&K to update their original USP design, which with what would become the P2000 series. So let's look at the USP a little bit and talk about what its features are in order for us to better appreciate the P2000. As you can see, I've got the original full-size USP in the original caliber 40 Smith & Wesson. This is a duty-sized weapon. It was intended in that role for military and law enforcement contracts. As such, it's a big gun. But H&K did some really unique things with it. First of all, revolutionary space-age polymer construction, going with a polymer frame pistol, which they had done back in the early 1970s with the VP70. Now they've committed to that as being a very fast and efficient way to manufacture the weapon. And then they changed the operating system. Gone is the kind of complex gas-retarded delay system that you had from the P7 series, and now they've gone to a tried and true Browning tilting barrel short recoil operated system. Obviously very reliable, much easier and cost effective to produce, and they've created a modular, or in this case, universal self-loading pistol, the universal nature of the receiver, where they had 10 different variants that you could purchase the gun in any one of those variants, or with the correct parts and the experience, you could convert your pistol in whatever variant it came in to any one of those other variants. So it's a very modular pistol design, and that added to the wide popularity of the gun. No longer did you have to present this to an individual person or to a contract and say, well, this is the gun, take it or leave it. You could modify it from double action, single action, with a safety and decocker and so on. We'll go through all those different features here in a moment. Made it very, very, very successful. And opened it up into a new market. Another great feature on it was the first pistol to have an integrated accessory rail. Obviously nowadays people would look at this and say, well, that's very unusual. It's not user-friendly. I need a Picatinny rail. But at the time, the Picatinny rail wasn't the industry standard it was. This was the first one out there. H&K came up with their own design. Obviously, they've modified it into what we see on the newer pistols today. But that was a big first, and they actually worked with a company that created a light that worked with the gun, and you could purchase that as well from H&K. So that made it great for a home defense or from a law enforcement standpoint. But the modular design, as we'll go into the different variants. As you can see, this one here has what we call a multifunction lever on the left side of the receiver. This is considered variant 1 or V1. This is a double action, single action hammer fired gun. And in V1, you have a multifunction lever that has a safe position up top, a fire position in the middle. And if you had it in single action mode and were firing and wanted to render it safe, hammer down again, you push all the way down and you had a decocker. Variant 2 was the same functionality, but with the multifunction lever on the other side for a left-handed shooter. Then they had variant 3, which had a similar multifunction lever, but instead of having safe and fire markings on it, it eliminated the safe functionality. It just had fire and decock, and it was meant for a gun that would be a double action, single action gun, but that you would carry hammer down. You wouldn't use a safety. You'd use the long double action trigger pull as your safety. You would fire, and then when you were done firing and the hammer was back because of the 8-step cycle of operation, you would just push the decocker and it would go back to the fire position. That's variant 3 on the left side for right-handed shooter, variant 4 on the right-hand side. Then you had variant 5 and 6, which were a true double action variant, but with an external safety. There was no need for a decocker on a double action only gun, where the hammer is going to go back to the hammer down position each time. But some agencies, some people might want the extra added benefit of having a safety. So variant 5 had a safety with a fire and a true double action on the left or right side. On the right side for variant 6. Then variant 7 was a true double action only model, very heavy, like revolver style weight to it, and no external safety or decocker functionality. Might seem odd today to have such a heavy trigger pull, but this was designed at the time period where you still had a lot of agencies and even maybe concealed carry holders who were transitioning from a big, heavy double action revolver to now wanting a semi-automatic gun and having a trigger pull that had the similar capability and feel of a double action revolver. That was an option they wanted to have. They did not exercise a variant 8 for some reason, and then 9 and 10 were considered kind of a 1911 style. Still a double action, single action type gun, but it was meant to be carried single action and with the safety on. So you carry it cocked and locked. It did not have a decocking function. It just allowed the gun to be carried single action. So I would fire, the hammer would go back again, I'd put it back in there on either left or right side. So all of those different variants in one model. Very, very popular. They made many different models. They came into competition-focused ones with the Match and the Expert and the Elite. They came out with another model called the Tactical that had a threaded barrel so you could mount a suppressor on there. But they also came out with the Compact. And this is an example of my Armor cutaway, clear cutaway model compact pistol. As you can see, it's similar size. It's a little shorter at the front. It's a little shorter at the grip, but the dimensions side to side are about the same. Functionally, it's the same weapon. Operationally, internally, it does all the things that USP does. You can convert it to all the different variants. It's just in a smaller capacity. And this was a great option at the time as well. As you can expect, if you're marketing this to law enforcement community, well, again, it's a duty-sized weapon. H&K expected that to be for the officers, but you're also going to have your plainclothes guys, your detectives. You're going to have officers that need an off-duty type pistol. In the past, what we had seen when somebody was issued with, a large duty-size semi-auto like a Beretta 92 would be that pistol that fills those other roles would end up being a small frame revolver, like a Smith & Wesson J frame. And those are very capable guns. But when you have a semi-auto in 9mm large frame, and then you have a revolver in 357 or 38, you've got two different types of guns, which require different levels of training for the armorers, different spare parts, different types of ammo, different types of holsters and ammo pouches, and more importantly, different training programs in order to maintain proficiency and to qualify those weapons. That becomes more and more challenging for those agencies, those departments. If instead I can give them a smaller version of the same pistol they already use, yeah, there's a different holster possibly, but all the other stuff really carries over and the training carries over. That may not seem like a big deal to the average gun enthusiast, but if you've been on the training side like I have, with my own company, with the Marine Corps, trust me, developing training programs for two different types of weapons becomes much more complicated. So the USP Compact was designed and it filled that role. Obviously, also very popular with the concealed carry, average shooter department as well. And it was this pistol that we would see carry over into the end of the decade of what was leading up to become the P2000. Very compact gun, very capable gun, all the different variants you have. But as they went into the new century, and specifically a new requirement that came out of German federal law enforcement, they wanted a compact 9mm pistol to meet certain new requirements. And let me cover those requirements with you. Okay, so for this German government program, They had a few developmental criteria. The first one was they wanted a highest hit probability for instinctive shooting. Well, what that means when they talk about instinctive shooting is just being able to rapidly, the oh shit, he's got a gun scenario of present the weapon out and firing. One of the challenges that we've had in the past with a weapon that has an external safety is now there's one more thing I need to defeat before I can have the weapon firing. So H&K looked at that and said, is there a way that we can eliminate the safety feature, which would present the weapon into a faster one? Highest hit probability for instinctive shooting. They think about that as well. Though it wasn't a requirement for this contract because one of the other specifications for it was that they wanted to be hammer fired. H&K was seeing when they pitted their USP hammer fired guns in other contracts up against striker fired guns like a Glock, that they were having challenges with that first round strike capability. Anybody who's been around training for a while with handguns understands there's a reason why striker fired guns are so popular. That lightened, consistent trigger pull for every single shot is much easier for the average untrained shooter to become proficient with than it is a double action, single action gun where you have a heavy trigger pull, long nature in that first shot, and then it transitions to a shortened single fire mode. That was something they were aware of. It was a problem they didn't have previously with their P7 series because they were striker fired guns, but now they're having that issue with their pistols, and they wanted to try and find a way to eliminate that. And we'll go into their solution, which in my opinion is absolutely incredible. Other criteria, it had to be reliable under the most adverse conditions. We obviously saw the USP was able to perform in those ways. And then it needed to be able to be perfect for ergonomics for both left and right-handed shooters. It had to be fully ambidextrous. Now that becomes a problem for the USP because though it has a paddle mag release that's accessible from both sides, and you've got a multifunction lever that you could put on the left or right side with some changes, or even get the ambi kit and do that, I did not have a slide release on the other side of the weapon. It wasn't fully ambidextrous. And on top of that, the overall dimensional requirements for this program meant that it was too wide with an ambi kit on the gun. They needed to minimize the overall dimensions a little bit. It had to also be adaptable to different hand sizes of the shooters. That was one of the challenges that they had with the original USP. The USP polymer framed doesn't really affect me, but I know I've had a lot of other shooters that will say when the weapon is trigger at rest, if they have a smaller hand, they have a hard time getting the proper position on there. The reason why the grip is so big is that H&K had originally designed the magazines to be polymer, just like the receiver. This was where they're going with all their other designs. Polymer was their new focus. But in order to make a polymer magazine body as strong and resilient as the steel ones, it meant that now the magazine body would have thicker walls. Well, that means the magazine is overall larger than it needs to be, and that meant your grip had to be larger. When they went to the compact model and they wanted to take advantage of smaller dimensions and the complaints about larger size, they went back to a metal style body that they'd done previously on their pistols, and that's what's carried over ever since. That allowed the grip to be even smaller. But now with this new contract requirement, you have a need to be able to customize the pistol to different hand sizes. So we'll see a change in the design of the receiver in order to make that function work for it. Okay. Those were the main features, specification features that were necessary. So they knew that they couldn't just take the USP compact and enter it. It wasn't going to meet those requirements. And if you know anything about how governmental procurement programs work, they're not as user-friendly as you might think. When all of the requirements are put together, you might expect it's going to be the gun guys who know everything about that, and they've reached out to Heckler and Koch and some other company and talked about different things, what they want, and they put that on a document. A lot of times that doesn't happen that way. Unfortunately, it's a guy who most likely is not a gun guy and who sits at a desk job and who, the day before had just written a new requirement for a microwave oven is now doing a requirement for a handgun. And those specifications that they lay out are very specific, meaning like dimensions on how wide it can be and this and that. And the firearms company does not have the ability to just call them up and say, hey, go ahead and change that dimension, make it a little bit bigger, make it a little bit smaller. Let me explain why you'd want this. It doesn't work out. So you have to find a way to fit within the confines of that specific requirement. And when later on, I'll talk to you about a unique variant of the P2000 that doesn't make a lot of sense unless you look at it from a standpoint of they were just doing what the requirement told them they needed to do. So they want to submit the USP compact for this federal German requirement, but they can't. So they have to go and make some modifications. They do two primary things. One, they evolve this basic design, and then they make a change to one of the variants to make it more effective in solving that issue we talked about with reliable, first round accuracy and performance. So here's your USP compact. Now let's look at the P2000. I've got another armor cutaway version of that one as well. If I lay these two guns on top of each other, you will notice that they are, again, very similar in size and dimensionally. Take the magazine out, that'll probably solve that problem. If you look at the rear, they're almost the same size. It is very obvious that what H&K did was they took this size and just said, okay, that's going to be the new thing. Even though this is a compact model, not a duty size, for this new requirement, they're not asking for a full-size gun. They want one that's more compact, so we'll use that. And basically what they did was they took all these blocky dimensions on the USP, which is really an overbuilt gun. And at that point, they'd had enough time on the gun to realize, well, we can contour off some of these edges, round them up, and we can make the pistol a little bit smaller overall. You can see on the front of the trigger guard, we had more of a rounded concave section. This is more slanted off. And then we can see that gone is the H&K proprietary accessory rail. But now we see a very unusual accessory here. You see kind of a rectangular cutout there and there and here and here. Well, this was because of a requirement for a light that was already part of the contract. So there was another company that was creating a light. That's how the light mounted. So H&K had to redesign it in order to fit that light. And then what you'll notice here on the grip is gone is this kind of stippled texture here on the side. And instead you get this vertical line pattern on here. So it's kind of deep recesses that give you some grip texture, and you got a little place here for your thumb that's kind of smoothed out. You still got texture here on the front and the back, but now it's changed from what a lot of people call the meat tenderizer, kind of these pointed grips that some people would complain about was too rough. They've now turned this to a little less aggressive texturing here, stippling on the front and rear of the grip. So it's still got a lot of good grip potential, but not nearly as aggressive here. Some people have complained about this design, which if you've ever seen an MP7, this is the same kind of design they used on the grip on the MP7, saying they don't feel it gives enough grip and they want more texture on there. But for me, P2000, P2000 SK, these are concealed carry type guns for me, and I carry inside the waistband, either an appendix carry up front or on my side, and having something that's not as aggressive as some of these rougher textures, especially if it's against bare skin under a t-shirt, this is, I find, much more comfortable to carry than it would be if I was carrying a USP compact or a VP9 or a P30 series gun. So I actually like it. The other thing you'll notice here is this black polymer portion here at the end. In order to meet the requirement for adjustability for different hand sizes, they came up with exchangeable rear back straps. 4 different sizes for the P2000, a small, medium, large, and extra large. allowed you to simply by removing this pin here at the bottom, which holds it in place and serves the additional role as a lanyard loop, you can slide that off and then slide on the other one, put the pin back in place and go at the user level. So that gave you adjustability. You will also notice we now have a slide lock, slide release on the right side of the weapon as well as the left. So a left or right-handed shooter can now function the weapon completely. It's fully ambidextrous. This one, as you can see, also has the addition of a decocker here at the back. So again, to meet these dimensions where they no longer wanted to have an external safety and they wanted to shrink up the width of it, they removed the decocker from the side of the weapon and they placed it here on the rear just to the left of the hammer. I find that actually very intuitive because when I go to reholster, I always put my thumb on the back of the pistol. That tells me whether or not I'm in hammer down or hammer back configuration, and then I can just press the decock button right there if I want to in order to render the weapon hammer down again. So really neat functionality for the weapon. So those are the basic features. We'll look internally at the other things that separate this out and how this works later when we disassemble the gun. But that's your original P2000 in 9mm. This one is what we refer to as the Euro P2000, because as we will see, when this was released in Germany and in Europe, this is the configuration. They then had to modify it slightly to create what we have here in the US as the P2000. One other feature that makes it very specific to the European model was when they shrunk down the grip in order to accommodate this, they changed the size of the magazine well. So whereas before you had the USP Compact that used a 13 round 9mm magazine, this requirement for this contract also had a 13 round magazine, but now the magazine was smaller. Well, what does that mean? It means that your standard magazine won't fit. Every once in a while, I'll see somebody who will find one of these European model P2000s, on a gun broker somewhere that somebody has imported through a secondary importer. It's a former, police issue pistol, and they think, oh, that's really cool, I'm going to buy it. And sometimes I've seen them, they don't even come with a magazine, or they only come with one magazine. And they're thinking to themselves, it's a P2000, I'll just go on to H&K's website, order a few mags, and I'll be good to go. But then they try and get the mag in, and it won't fit. So the original Euro version P2000, it has a 13 round mag, but it's a different size to fit it. They also offered a 16 round magazine, which is the same magazine body, but with a additional extension on the base plate, which, as you can see here in this photo, looks like what we would later call from the HK45 Compact that's in the mag, the club foot or the elephant's foot magazine. But again, that magazine designed for the European model. But those are the differences there. So we've got the USP Compact, the P2000. It goes on to win that contract. So you're going to see it be adopted and approved. You can see here's the certification document for German service. So once they get this approval, it can be ordered and issued to any of the German states or any of their federal services. So we start seeing that. We saw it with several of the German states. In fact, probably one of the most popular issues is Lower Saxony. If you are a P7 owner and you have a P7 M8 in your collection that has this vertical mill mark on the slide where the material has been removed from there, that is most likely a Lower Saxony police issue P7 M8 that H&K brought back in, cleaned up, sent to HK USA, and then resold on the US commercial market. When they turned in those P7 M8s, they got these P2000s. You also saw Swiss Federal Police and some of their individual organizations receive the P2000. Here's a couple of pictures of different markings on the slides to reference those specific organizations. We also saw a Saudi contract for the P2000 We saw Japan and their security forces pick it up, and Canada for their correctional services was another popular one, and we'll get into its use within the correctional service community as well here later in the video. But all this is happening in 2001. Limited production throughout that year, and then full-scale production kicking off at the beginning of 2002. Now let's focus on the U.S. What's happening at the end of 2001 in the United States? Well, of course, September 11th is happening. And as you will recall, we saw a reorganization of our federal law enforcement agencies under a new banner of Homeland Defense at that time. So you had TSA, Transportation Agency, you had your Border Patrol and ICE and Customs, all those guys are rolling up. You had your U.S. Marshals, and now we have this big influx of Air Marshals that fit in. When everybody comes together, you've got people with different weapons in different organizations, and then you've got new officers and be armed with new weapons. So a massive contract requirement went out for a new handgun to support these organizations. Lots of different companies submitted. H&K participated as well. And at the time, they had the USP Compact. And they had this new modification to the trigger system that was designed around the USP series, but they also had the new P2000. So I'll probably wait to get into how the new trigger system works here. I'll show that to you here in a moment. But to basically explain it, H&K had taken their original double action only, which again, as I mentioned, was a very heavy trigger pull on like a revolver style weight. And they were able to modify that to create what I consider an enhanced double action only, with a much lighter trigger pull and consistent all the way through. In Europe, they described this and gave it the name of CDA, or Combat Defensive Action. When they went to this contract for this large U.S. law enforcement program, the marketing team at HK USA said, yeah, CDA doesn't really sound right. This is a law enforcement program. Can we change the name to LEM? So here in the U.S., this same trigger system is referred to as LEM, or law enforcement modification, and that enhanced double action only is what they put in the USP compacts that they were providing. And then they took the P2000 and they modified that as well. Well, how did they modify it? They took it and made a couple of changes. The most notably is they modified the accessory rail. So gone is this unique rectangular mounting section here for this specific German light. Well, there is no specific German light here in the US, so they basically take the same USP compact design, made the same ergonomic changes, even kept the concave design on the trigger, but now they put a Milstead 1913 accessory mounting point there at the front, and they changed the dimensions of the grip just slightly so that it will use the same USP compact magazines that we had before. So if you're already an organization that has a USP compact, your magazines are carry over, or if you're a civilian gun owner, you've already got a USP compact, now you can use the same 13-round magazine as the P2000. I mentioned 9mm 13-round magazine because I'm referring to the 9mm variants. The P2000 was offered in 9 as well as 40. If you remember that time frame, 40 was a very popular cartridge within the law enforcement community. The magazine capacity on there, just like it was in the USP compact, was dropped down to 12 rounds. And then the other hot cartridge at the time was 357 SIG. You saw the P2000 and also the P2000 SK, which we'll get to here shortly, offered in that caliber as well. So you can find these out on the used market in 9, 40, and 357. Today, you only find 9mm still offered from a production standpoint. But those three pistols, the USP Compact, the P2000 US Spec, and the P2000 SK, were all provided for this large contract, and H&K won. So depending on which organization within Homeland Security was you would get one of those 3 guns. It ended up being the largest law enforcement handgun contract in history, and it was a big win for H&K at that time. So you would see your Border Patrol guys, as I throw out some pictures here, they're training with the P2000, moving on through there. And sometimes you go to the airport, you'd see your TSA guys and customs with them as well. And then at that point, it was offered into the U.S. commercial market. So let's talk about the different models and the variants. Okay, so different variants of the pistol. Unlike the USP series, which as we've mentioned is completely modular, when they went to the P2000 series, they created 2 different receivers. There's one receiver for double action, single action. There's another receiver for their double action only or enhanced double action only. And I've got a P2000 here, a P2000 SK here. We'll go more into the SK here later. As you can see, if you look at the rear, you'll notice that this one in the SK is a double action, single action. It has a spurred hammer that allows me to reach up and grab the back of it and cock it to single action mode if I want. And it has a decocking button to the left of the hammer that safely decocks the weapon back into double action hammer down mode. The LEM model has a spurred hammer, which I can still kind of grab, but is not meant to be grabbed. It's more of a low snag hazard option there in the bob hammer, and there is no decocking function because there would be no reason to decock a double action only gun. Okay, the difference in the receivers is there is no cutout here on the left side, left of the hammer, for the decocking button that is in the DASM model. So what does that mean? It means that unlike the USP, which you could go out and buy and then decide, and whatever whim you feel of the day, hey, I'm going to change my USP from variant 1 to variant 7. Okay, great. And you go ahead and do it. With the P2000 series, it was intended that if you had a DASA gun, that's what you got. You would not change that to LEM. If you had an LEM gun, we'll talk about how we can change to the other LEM variants or double action variants, but you would not change it back to that. You would end up going and buying the other gun. So that's the difference in those specific receivers. Now let's talk about the variants. The variants are different. So if you were looking V1 through V10 on the USP, those don't carry over here. It's a whole new variant number. We'll start with variant 1. Variant 1 is considered LEM light or CDA light. And again, I'll showcase how LEM CDA actually functions here in a moment. But basically what that means is I would have a enhanced double action only that has a very light trigger pull in there, somewhere between 4.5 to 5 pounds. LEM heavy is variant 2. Same enhanced double action only CDA LEM, but now the trigger pull is about 7.5 to 8 pounds. Okay, the difference between V1 and V2 is literally just springs. So I could open up the slides and try and show you inside, but it'd be easier if I showcase here. Hopefully this will come out clearly. If you look, I've got 2 different trigger return springs. This one here on the left, you should be able to see has more narrow, more rounded coils, whereas the one on the right has more squarish, thick coils. Okay, the one on the left is your light LEM. The one on the right is your heavy LEM, and that's what makes the difference between the lighter trigger pull and the heavy trigger pull. So, though it could be ordered that way, and it would come on the box, you'd see the box, it would say P2000 V1 or P2000 V2 or P2000 V3. If I have a V1 or a V2, light or heavy, I can convert that from heavy to light or light to heavy just by changing out those springs. So there's your V1 and V2. V3 is your double action only model. That's an example of what this P2000 SK is here. That's where I have no external safety. It's meant to be carried in double action mode, hammer down like this. Your first shot would be that long, heavy trigger pull, and then the 8-step cycle of operation would hold your hammer back to the rear, and your follow-on shots would be the shorter, lighter trigger pull. And I have my decocker at the rear to safely decock the weapon. If I was firing, bang, 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 and then decided I'm done firing, I would just simply hit the decocker, render the weapon safe again, and reholster. So that's your variant 3. That's what most people are aware of here in the US. But wait, there's more. There's also a variant 4, which in the US is not something that is a standard order capability weapon. It is also a LEM variant. It's actually considered LEM medium. So whereas V1 is LEM light and V2 is LEM heavy, V4 comes in the middle. It is more than just the change of a trigger return spring. There's actually several parts that are swapped out internally, and it's bought as a kit. So though I can't get the gun complete from HK USA, I could buy a variant 1 or a variant 2 and then order the variant 4, it's referred to as LEM 4.1 accessory kit, and then send it to somebody like me in HK Armor, and I can install that for you. Now you get a medium weight. So whereas this was 4.5 to 5, and this is 7.5 to 8, you get somewhere in between with variant 4, usually around 5.5 pounds. But it also gives you a more responsive reset of the trigger, which a lot of guys find preferable. So that's your variant 4. Most people think that's where it ends, but most people would be wrong. It carries on to variant 5. Variant 5 is a little known example that I've not seen available here in the US, and that is a LEM model receiver, but instead of LEM CDA enhanced double action only, it is a true double action only, where again, we're going back to the heavier trigger weight, where every trigger pull is the same long, heavy trigger pull like it would be with a revolver. This trigger variant had a trigger pull that was a little bit more than 8 pounds. And again, not one you normally see from H&K, but was designed for a specific requirement that said it's got to be this way. So H&K said, great, you want a trigger pull that's greater than 8 pounds? Well, none of these are going to work for you. So we're going to go back to this older double action only one, and we're going to give you that. Then they created a variant 6, which is the same exact thing, but as you'll see here in the picture, I said I'll showcase, instead of the markings with the serial number and all the other such, those markings are on the opposite side of the receiver. That was for one specific German contract. Again, haven't seen it here in the US, but it does exist. So there's your variant 1 through 6. And you might think, okay, thanks, James, I got it all. But of course, there's one more. And it's one I've already shown you, but didn't actually talk about. And that is the way this one is set up. This is variant 0. And this comes from, again, the original contract requirement for this pistol. And this is where you get into the issue where I talk about it's really difficult to communicate with the requirements writers and explain what they want. They said it had to be hammer fired. They said they wanted to have this decocking function. Okay. They also mentioned that because they're thinking hammer fired, they wanted it to have a spurred hammer, so I cock it back. But they also wanted this lighter, consistent trigger. So what H&K did was they created an LEM CDA model. So it's an enhanced double action only, but they put a spurred hammer on it and they put a decocker on it. You would never use it's functional. I can hit it, and now I have a really long, heavy trigger pull like I would in variant 5 or 6. But if I cycle it, I'm now getting the much lighter enhanced double action trigger pull that I get in regular CDA, but I've got a spurred hammer. So this really unusual one where it is a CDA LEM model, but with a spurred LEM hammer and a decocker, is considered variant 0. Hopefully I've confused you enough on the different variants. Now let's talk about what CDA LEM is. Okay, so to discuss CDA LEM, let's first take a look at our USP compact cutaway. Again, this is a variant 1 DASA model. The compact models from the USP have a bobbed hammer, but this one is a double action, single action. So I have the hammer back, I can put my safety on, I can decock it, I can have a long trigger pull at the front, then the 8-step cycle of operation kicks in and it holds the hammer back, and now I have a shorter trigger pull, lighter trigger pull for the second shot. Okay, double action, single action. What we're talking about there is two actions happening. That's why I call it double action. Your first action is I have to pull the trigger back far enough for the hammer to compress. Probably can't see it very well in here, but the hammer strut and spring inside here. So that's your first action. I'm pulling the trigger and the trigger bar back far enough that the hammer cocks and compresses the hammer strut and spring. And it's being held now by the sear. The second action of double action is now pulling the trigger bar far enough back, or the trigger far enough back to pull the trigger bar far enough forward to release the hammer from the sear, and that makes the firing done. Single action, the slide has already cocked the hammer strut and spring and is holding the hammer against the sear. So my single action is I only have to pull the trigger far enough to release the hammer from the sear. When we get to CDA, what they have done is they have redesigned your hammer. Normally you have a one-piece hammer that looks like this. That's a DASA hammer. There's the spur on the back. When they went to LEM, now they create a spurred hammer, though it could be a bobbed hammer, though it could be a spurred hammer like CDA 0 I just showed you. But what you'll notice here is it's hollowed out in the center. And they create what's called a cocking piece. And that's this piece here. It fits inside the hammer like that, and it pivots, rotates slightly within that hammer. There's a little notch on the end of it. And then you have this dog leg spring that sits on the outside of it like that and gives repound pressure between the hammer and the sear. Sorry, the sear orientation would be like that on the other side. Okay, so there's your hammer and sear when the hammer is cocked back to the rear. Okay, that's your difference. Normally what happens is your hammer cocks and the sear holds it like that. In LEM, what happens is your hammer goes back, this cocking piece rotates independently, and it holds on the sear, and then the hammer itself can move forward again, even though the cocking piece is holding it up against the sear. That's why when I look here, I see the hammer forward, and I'm thinking, well, it's in double action mode, like the hammer's forward. You notice I pull the trigger, the hammer goes back, it goes forward again. The hammer is pivoting independent here of the cocking piece. The cocking piece is actually held against the sear right now, and if I could take this apart without the spring falling out, you would see the hammer strut and spring are compressed at this moment. Okay, and the only thing that's holding it in place is the cocking piece. When I pull the trigger, this sear actuator latch on the sear causes the sear to drop and the hammer to go forward. So if I take, I'll show you in this cutaway here, and we point right in here, this is your sear. That's your trigger bar, and your sear is right behind it. Hopefully if I do this, you can see the sear kind of come forward. Now you can't really see it. Maybe here, I'll decock it. I'll decock it and you'll see the sear fall forward right there. I'll do it again for you. Oops, sorry, decocking it. See how the sear fell forward? That would be what it would look like when the trigger bar is pulling the sear off of the cocking piece. I can't show it to you when I pull the trigger because the trigger bar itself is moving and blocking that view. But that's how that works. So basically what is happening is the slide either being manually cycled for your first round in the magazine or cycled every time that you fire the weapon. It goes through 8-step cycle of operation. Is the cocking piece is pre-cocking the hammer strut and spring and holding the hammer on the sear. So your first shot is still long like it would be, but the weight of that is significantly less because I'm not having to compress the hammer strut and spring. I'm just moving against the spring tension here, and I get to the wall where now the hammer and sear are right up against each other. You can't move, and then I break through it. And then every follow-on shot, it's already pre-cocked, so I just go to my reset point and I fire again. So it's like a striker fired gun in how it operates, except there's a longer initial take-up maybe a little bit more weight than there would be on a striker-fired gun, depending on which variant you have, but it's going to operate very much like a striker-fired gun. But you get the reliability that most people prefer in a hammer-fired gun. The other benefit that most people don't think about is that on a gun like this, that is set up in enhanced double action only, I have a second strike capability. What does that mean? Well, let's say I had the guns all loaded up, I'm ready to go, I'm set up in my LEM mode, ready to fire, and I go ahead and I pull the trigger, and for whatever reason, the gun doesn't go off. Maybe I got a light primer strike, I've got something wrong with the ammo. If I wanted to try and fire again, all I have to do is pull the trigger one more time. Now that time it won't be pre-cocked. It would be a true double action trigger pull, much heavier, but I could do that as I would. If I instead had a striker fired gun, like my VP9 here, and I have to cycle it to load it, and now the striker or firing pin is being held by the sear, that first shot, if it doesn't go off for whatever reason, I can't just pull the trigger again for second strike capability. I have to rack the slide to pre-cock the striker again. Some people would say, well, I would do that anyway. I would just do a tap, rack, bang to get that defective cartridge out. But maybe you're limited on ammo or time, or maybe I don't have my second hand. Maybe I'm in close with somebody and something prevented that weapon from going off. Maybe they just pushed it far enough that it was out of battery and it didn't go off. I pulled the trigger, but it didn't fire or whatever. This will allow me to second strike capability. So a benefit for some people as they want. But this system, this LEM system that they were able to convert, and this example that I show you here, this is a kit for converting a USP. So if I have a USP or an HK45 series gun and it's in DAS and I want to convert it to LEM light or heavy, I can order this kit and do that. That kit is not available for the P2000 series. You either buy it one way or the other. And probably the reason why you'll see is if I look at these two hammers, this one here is for the USP, this one here is for the P2000. You see the strut hole there for the axle, and you see how large that one is. These don't fit. So the parts don't fit, even though they operate similarly, look similar, they are different in that capacity. So hopefully that makes sense how the operation works. Again, you're basically pre-cocking your hammer, strut, and spring. That's taking off the great resistance of that first trigger pull. And every single trigger pull is going to be the same lightened, consistent trigger pull all the way through like it would be with a striker-fired gun. Okay, now let's talk about a couple of the different models that are available. Obviously, you have the P2000, and then you've got your P2000 SK. Quick before I move on to the SK, same pistols. Both these are LEM, but look at the grips. This one has your medium grip backstrap. This one has your extra large backstrap on there. The benefit of the extra large, obviously, for somebody who's got man-sized hands, is this one's actually rubber coated, and it extends out here. So if you were maybe had the 40 or a 357 SIG model and it's kind of snappy, you want a little bit more comfort, and you have big hands, having the extra large one here with the rubber end on it might make that a little bit more comfortable for you. So those are versions of the US spec LEM model P2000. As we said before, when we talked about the USP Compact being a smaller version of the USP, when they came out with the P2000, now it already is a compact size weapon, but they were presented with, again, another requirement to have an even smaller capable weapon. So they created the first of what we would now see that's been carried on with the P30 series and the VP9 series of the SK. Now, as you can see in this picture here I'll show you, the initial prototypes, they were actually called the P2000K. The K, as you might remember from other H&K weapons, like the smaller version of the MP5 was called the MP5K. The smaller version of the G3 was called the G3K. The K standing for Kurs, or the German word for short. So initially they were going to call it that, but then they decided, well, if I've already got a compact gun and now this one's even smaller, they went with the subcompact
designation, S for sub, K for the German word for compact. So that's where we get that designation. Just like we talked about the USP to the USP compact, it is the same functional operation, just slightly smaller dimensions. So when I lay them down beside, you can see it's just a little bit shorter there at the front end. They've changed the more of a slant here on the trigger guard versus this concave design. And really the rest of it is a shorter grip. So we still have the exchangeable grip panels. I don't have as much variety, but you can see this one is a large grip panel, and no, they're both larges on my cutaway and on my carry. So slightly shorter grip. What that means is I've only got placement for 2 fingers around the bottom, where I can get 3 fingers on the standard P2000. But other than that, the same gun. We'll talk about when we break them down how some things change on barrel length. I want to say it's like 3.7 inches in length for the full size and 3.3 for the compact. They redesign the recoil spring assembly, which I'll showcase for you. But other than that, it's pretty much the same gun. In order to have a smaller grip, smaller dimensions, they went with a smaller magazine. So whereas I have the 13 round 9mm magazine that fits in the P2000, has this little pinky extension or a flat base plate, allows me to grip around there. When they went to the P2000 SK, same style magazine body, but just cut off shorter. And now I can either have a flush fit base, or as you can see, this rubberized pinky extension. Okay. I prefer the pinky extension, even though it doesn't give me any more ammo capacity. I don't have a flush fit base one here to showcase to you because I don't have them in my collection. I find that the flush fit base doesn't do anything for me. I can't get my pinky on there. When I at least have the pinky extension, I can fit all fingers on there. I understand why they did the flush base. They want it to be as concealable as possible and less printing for that reason. But I've done enough time training and studying training, and specifically grip, and how important having all your fingers are on a grip to your ability to shoot fast and accurately, and how crucially important the pinky is. Most people don't think about it, but when I grab a baseball bat, I grab a tennis racket, you start with your pinky. And if I take my thumb out of the equation, because it's not really doing anything, my trigger finger's out of the equation, I'm really only holding on to the gun with a solid grip with 3 fingers. If I have a flush fit base and I can't get the pinky on, now I'm down to 2. So I'm a big fan of having all 3 fingers on the grip. But 10 round mag in 9mm, 9 in 40 caliber as well. So that was your basic option, but you have some other options. Obviously, because the magazine body itself is the same dimensions, if you have a P2000, I can take my P2000 magazine and insert it in my P2000 SK. It will stick out further and it'll have this gap where I can see the magazine body, but I can use that as well. That's a benefit. A company called X-Grip came up with this little rubberized extension that you could then take and slide the sleeve down over your full-size P2000 mag. And now when you put it in the P2000 SK, now I've got a full grip all the way around. This has been a popular option for years. I found that it works best if you're going to use it to have it be in the gun already versus like on a magazine pouch. There is nothing but the friction here to hold it in place. It doesn't like lock anywhere. And what I found is overuse and bouncing around and whatnot and dropping them on the ground for training, this will start to slide down. And then when I go to do mag reloads, I can cause problems. So if I was going to use one of these, I would have it be in the gun versus a spare one. But that was an initial concept to fill that space in the magazine. When they went to the P30, they redesigned to now have a 15-round magazine instead of the P2000's 13-round magazine. But it kept the same mag body dimensions, so I can put a P30, which then became the VP9 15-round mag in the gun, and same thing, it'll stick out below. It'll also fit in the standard P2000. So you have those options. Then when they came out with the P30 SK, they redesigned new magazines. So same body, still 10-round magazine for the SK variant, but you can see it fits in the P2000 SK. And now we have a redesign of the pinky extension. It sticks down a little bit further. It's still rubber, but now it's got some stippling texture. This one works really well. And then, because they had seen this, H&K said, well, we can do that better. They came up with a 13-round magazine, which is basically the standard P2000 mag, with this built-in extension on there. That'll work in the P30 or the P2000, and you can see how it sticks down now. They also came up with a 15-round version, which sticks down just a little bit more, and is just the VP9 P30 mag, but with this extension on the bottom. That fits on there as well. And in recent years, H&K has been able to find a way to cram 2 rounds more into each mag. So now your 15-round mag is a 17-round mag. This one that was 15 is now 17. This one that was 13 is now 15. This one that's 10 is now 12, and so on. So my point here is you have a lot of capability to select different mags and interchange them with your P2000, your P2000 SK. So does it take Glock mags? No, it doesn't. But it takes all these, so you really don't have any shortage of mags. And if you own the other guns, you don't have to go out and buy a whole bunch of new mags. They'll carry over for you as well. So that's magazines. Hopefully that answers the questions and confusings. While I'm on here, one other popular upgrade that I do for customers, you can see here on the tag here, this is the HK45 compact mag release. There's the part number. This is the extended mag release. So if you look here, you'll see the standard mag release on the P2000. P2000 SK is kind of small and may be a little more challenging for you to operate, especially under stress. On all of my guns, I put in the HK45 compact magazine, which is a little longer and protrudes out a little farther than the standard P2000 mag. So that's a great simple upgrade. You just pop out that pin. There's a spring behind it. You put in the other mag release, put the spring back in, slide it back in place, and redo that pin. So that's a popular option for you. Okay, now let's talk about barrels and recoil spring assemblies. What I'm holding up here, this is the USP full-size recoil spring assembly. When this came out, this was really kind of a breakthrough within the community. Most of the times what you would see with firearms is they'll have a single recoil spring. Maybe it might be fitted over the barrel itself like it is on the P7 series. Or they'll have an additional rod with the spring that fits underneath the barrel. But it's just a single spring. When they went to the USP, they created a secondary buffer spring, which hopefully you can see here in the base. That gives you extra recoil mitigation. And actually, they found that this reduced the felt recoil by about 30% versus having a single spring. What this does is obviously when the gun fires, you have the initial impulse as the slide starts to move the rear, engages this secondary buffer spring initially, gives you a little bit of buffering there. Then the full larger spring engages all the way through until you get to the full rearward movement. And then the secondary buffer kicks in again and prevents the slide tang here at the base from impacting into the soft polymer of the locking lug area in the back. Really cool. When they went to the USP Compact, they couldn't fit all that dimensional stuff. So they lost some real estate. They had to come up with something different. And they changed to what you see here, which carries over into the P2000. What you'll notice here is this is a flat wire design versus what more traditional, rounded braided, rounded wire design. What H&K found is that the flat wire is actually a stronger system, and we've seen a lot of other companies go to a flat wire design since then. So you have a stronger spring in itself, even though you have a shorter over dimension, and then they added this polymer buffer. This just basically serves as a shock buff to, again, prevent the tang, as the slide's going to recoil, this tang from impacting against the back of the rod or in the soft polymer there. So it hits this polymer buffer and stops its movement. So that's what they did on the USP Compact and then the P2000. When they went to the P2000 SK, they lost more real estate again, and they were able to go back to a dual system. So you can see here's a flat wire design here in the rear, a smaller one. Now you have a larger one here with a buffer on the front end. And again, that's what allows it to be such a soft shooting system. I think a lot of people who don't have a design or kind of an interest in engineering background can fail to realize, because there's so many great guns out there that all work so well, but the challenges that are inherent in reducing the size of a gun. Every time you make something more compact, smaller, I'm losing real estate, but you still want to have those same things. So you want to be able to go to your gun store and pick up 115 grain, 124 grain, 147 grain, standard amp, pressure, plus P, rounded, hollow point, whatever. You don't care. You want to put it in your gun and have it work, regardless of whether it's 10 below or 105 degrees outside. All of those factors come into play. So for H&K to continue to modify their designs and make them work in each of these different sizes is really, really incredible. And these systems have carried over. So the same style design is what you see carry over the P30 SK and the VP9 SK. You can also see the barrels, the two links here between the P2000 here on one side, P2000 SK on the other. You can also see, here's the locking lug portion. This allows the pistol in the Browning short recoil tilting barrel design to move slightly back to the rear, and then it hits this ramp and causes it to tilt up. That's your delay. You can see what it functions off of is on this hook here. So when it sits at rest, they're here, and then you can see as it pushes, that angle on the hook is what causes it to tilt. Then within the slide, a couple of cool features I'll showcase here to you. We'll go through the safety features in a minute. This hole right here in the side looks like a hole for a roll pin. You're like, oh my God, there's a roll pin missing. That's actually a gunk relief valve. So as you're firing, obviously carbon is moving back through this little hole for the breech face where the firing pin, and carbon can build up on the front of the breech face. You get enough carbon, gunk, or whatever inside there, and you could actually prevent the firing pin from moving through and striking. H&K found many years ago with their P7 series was if I create this relief valve here, as the firing pin is going back and forth and the recoil impulse is forcing the slide one way or the other, any kind of buildup will fall out that channel and down the magazine well. So pretty cool little feature as we get in there. You can also see this lightning cut. This is a little oval section there, and another lightning cut and removal of material there on the, so we get the lighting a little better, on the side of the firing pin tunnel. That designates it as a 9mm variant. The 40 obviously needs more mass in the slide, so you won't see this significant removal of material in there on the slide. You look here on the top of the slide, you'll notice this red painted piece of material there. If the weapon was loaded and there was a round in the chamber, it would cause the extractor to pivot out, and you'd be able to see that red line a little more effectively. You would also be able to feel it if you put your thumb along the side and rotate it. So that's your kind of first safety feature on the weapon for loaded chamber indicator for you on the pistol. So that takes us into talking about safety features. If that's our first one, now let's talk about our next one. Okay, so now let's talk about the second safety feature on the pistol, and that's the disconnector. So if I look here at the rear of the receiver, the first thing I'm going to see as I move from the right side over towards the left is this piece right here. It's called the disconnector. See it from the side. If I put my thumb on top of it and I press down, you should notice that the trigger bar, the number 32 right here, presses down as well. Okay, the disconnector serves to prevent out of battery fire. Okay, what that means is I don't want the weapon to fire unless it's completely locked up. If it was not locked, meaning the slide fully forward, then the round, the cartridge that's sitting on the breech face, would not be fully supported by the chamber. And if it was allowed to detonate at that point, you would see the explosion. Instead of going all down the barrel, you'd see it come out the top and the side of the ejection port, down the magazine, while you could have catastrophic damage to your firearm and significant injury to the shooter. So in order to prevent out of battery fire, the disconnector comes into place. So when the disconnector is in its at-rest position sticking up like this, it allows the trigger bar to move back and forth. But if I press down on this disconnector, the trigger bar can still move, but it takes the trigger bar, if you see I'm pulling the trigger all the way back, it takes the trigger bar out of contact with the sear actuator latch to release the sear from the hammer. So if I pull the trigger now, the hammer falls. If I push on the disconnector, I can still pull the trigger, but the hammer won't fall because the trigger bar is disconnected from the sear. Okay, how does that work? Well, when the weapon is at rest, or when the slide is in battery, I should say, you will see here, try and get it, this whole cavity area right here. That's where the disconnector normally sits at rest position. But if you pull the slide out of position, the disconnector rides up this ramp, and you can actually see, well, it's going to show up here, there's kind of a wear line right here that extends through here. That's where that ramp portion then will push the disconnector down and it'll put it out. So the weapon has to be all the way in battery in order for the weapon to fire. So that's your second safety feature. Now for your third safety feature, let's move up into the slide, and we'll talk about two things we'll see here. One is you can't see visibly in here, and that's inside the firing pin tunnel. Wrapped around the firing pin is the firing pin spring. The firing pin spring provides enough resistance to prevent the firing pin from just going back and forth. That's how I can't just shake my gun and have the gun go off. I have to have enough resistance for the firing pin to overcome the resistance of the spring in order for it to move through and detonate the primer. The second feature here is this cylinder shape, vertically mounted through the top. This is called the firing pin block or firing pin drop safety. And you'll see I can press on it and it'll go up and down against its own spring tension. Okay. This works in concert with the firing pin itself. So if you look, here's a firing pin. You'll see it's rounded on one side, and then as I turn it over, you'll see that there's this cutout cavity, this hollow cavity right here on that side. And then if we look at the firing pin block, you'll know it's rounded on one side, and then we roll it over, and we can see again there's a rectangular cutout. Okay. When it's at rest position right here, those two cavities, those two cutouts do not meet each other, and the firing pin cannot move forward. They are blocked from each other. But when I press up against spring tension on the firing pin block or drop safety, it now presents that open cavity to the firing pin, allowing the firing pin to move through and hit that. So what does that mean? Again, it means that I can't just shake this and have it go off. The firing pin, when this is at rest, cannot move forward through the tunnel to go through the breech face and hit primer. You have to defeat the firing pin block by pushing it up and out of the way to allow the firing to move forward. So that's your third and fourth safety feature. Well, how do I defeat that, James? Well, you do that by looking back in the receiver at the next feature. We have the disconnector. Now, if I continue moving to the left, you'll see this feature starts back here, rotates up, it's got this kind of dog leg. Okay, this is called the control lever. And if I look at the side here and I pull the trigger back, the trigger bar pulls forward, you'll notice the control lever tilts up. Hopefully you guys can see that clearly. Okay, it's the control lever moving up that presses against the firing pin block or drop safety, pushing it up and out of the way of the firing pin tunnel. So in order to allow the firing to move forward, defeat that firing pin block safety, I have to cause this to move up. The only way I can get the control lever to move up to defeat it is to pull the trigger. Okay, if I'm not pulling the trigger, I can't move that to defeat that, to have that happen. So there's your next safety feature. Okay, then if we move to the left of the control lever, we see the catch, which is this piece that sits back here. Well, you guys can see it right there. Okay, let's take a look at your hammer. Okay, if we look at the hammer, it is flat here, but if we look on the opposite side, you'll notice there's a cavity right there, all flat. There's this recessed cutout there. Okay, normally, guys ask me this all the time on a DASA gun. They'll say, well, the decocker, you know, I hit this decocker and the hammer goes flying forward. Like, how is the gun not going off? The hammer's hitting the firing pin. Well, no, the hammer's not hitting the firing pin. the hammer is actually hitting the catch. So the catch, which hopefully again you guys can see here in this angle, this piece right here, when it is at rest, it sits up high enough that the angled portion of it is hitting this flat portion. It's hitting this flat portion of the hammer. Okay, but when I pull the trigger, just as it pivots the control lever up here to defeat the firing pin block safety, you will notice at the rear, it tips the bottom, the catch down. When the catch pivots down, no longer will it hit this flat surface up here, it'll fall inside the cavity, allowing the hammer to fall further forward. Let me show you how we can see that more clearly in the cutaway. And, again, I'm hoping I can get the lighting correct here for you. But this circular cutout here, you should be able to see the firing pin protruding through the rear right there. Okay. And when the hammer is at rest, hopefully you can see the amount of space between the firing pin and the hammer. That's because the catch is preventing it from going any forward. Now watch when I hit watch when I pull the trigger all the way through. Now the hammer can go all the way up until where the firing pin is. And when I put it back here again, now you'll see there's a gap. So the catch is preventing the hammer from striking the firing pin. The only way to defeat the catch is to pull the trigger. So again, safety-wise, the gun's not going to go off unless I pull the trigger, because I have to pull the trigger in order to move the trigger bar, in order to drop the catch down, in order to raise the control lever up, in order to defeat the firing pin block, in order to clear the firing pin tunnel so the firing pin spring can be hit by the hammer and go forward, and everything's got to be in battery. So pretty cool series of safety features. The other ones you'll see, all of the hammers have this little rubber coating on the back, and the magazines all have a rubberized coating on there. That's to help dissipate the energy if the gun is dropped on any of those angles, part of their drop safety test as well. And then there's one more safety feature that I want to showcase that you probably don't know about, or if you have heard about, you've probably never seen. So hang on, let me clear the bench, set this up, and we'll kick on for our last and probably most unique safety feature, because it's one that's only available here on the P2000 series. Okay, if you will remember earlier in the video, I talked about some of the users. One of the users globally for this was Canadian Corrections Organization. The U.S. Corrections Organization also showed interest in this pistol, as they had with the USP before it. One of the requirements that you often see from corrections agencies, think about jails and prisons, is that the pistols that they're armed their officers with need to have a magazine disconnect safety. Okay, as you can imagine, you're an armed officer, you're every day surrounded by all of these inmates. There's a heightened concern that you could be overpowered and that your handgun could then be used against you and others if it was taken away. If there was a way to render the weapon incapable of firing, that would be a big benefit. Now, we've seen magazine disconnect safeties in guns previously. Ones that come to mind are the Browning High Power or the 3rd Gen Smith & Wessons. But in those cases, what you saw was that the inclusion of a magazine disconnect safety actually had a negative effect on the performance of the trigger. It either made the trigger significantly heavier or gritty feeling, and a lot of times you would see owners try and remove those parts out of the gun and then talk about how much better the gun is to shoot now that I don't have this magazine disconnect safety in there. H&K was able to find a way to include it where it does not affect the trigger's performance at all. Whether you have it in the gun or you don't, it's the same performance. And they did it as a retrofit accessory kit, which again, most people don't even know exists as a capability. So we'll showcase that here. This actually dates back to the USP. There was interest from U.S. Corrections for a magazine disconnect safety. The USP had already designed, so when they presented this back to the engineers, they had to come up with a retrofit operation, and it was kind of janky. It fit over the sear and blocked the hammer. Was not the best way. But when they went to the P2000, they were able to redesign the receiver in a way that allowed this to work. So let's look at a couple of things here. The first thing I want you to do is, if you look at your P2000 or P2000 SK, and I encourage you to grab yours now and go ahead and take your slide off and look at the right side. Right below the trigger bar, we see 32, and right above where the right side slide lock slide release is, you should see a little hole right here. Now, if you have a Euro version P2000, it won't be there. It's only in the US spec ones, but you can see it right there. Now, if I look inside here, and again, this might be kind of hard for me to see with the lighting and the black on black. I'll showcase on the one that's got it in here. But look down the right side, you will see a little shelf. It's here at the rear. You'll see that corresponding hole that we talked about there. And then you'll see another shelf over on this side. That is for your magazine disconnect safety kit. It actually comes in 3 parts. Okay, so this is the actual disconnect safety. This is the little axle that holds it through the receiver, and this is your dog leg spring that gives it its rebound pressure. Okay, this is the front end with this dog leg arm. This is the back end with this little rounded kind of shark fin on there, and it pivots against spring tension on that center point. It goes up or down. Okay, so let's showcase it in the pistol. Okay, so this is P2000. This is when I've got it installed in order to showcase it. So right now, I put the magazine in the pistol. It operates as it should. I can shoot all day long. Take the magazine out of the pistol, it's completely locked up. I can pull the trigger just slightly, but then you can see it won't move any further forward. Now I can still cycle it, but I cannot fire it. So even if I had a loaded gun, round in the chamber, and I dump the magazine, even if there's still a round in the chamber, I cannot get the weapon to fire. Well, James, how does that work? Well, I will show you. Okay. When I take the weapon apart, again, it may be difficult to see under the lighting, but this arm is the front arm of the disconnect safety. And if I look now here on the trigger bar, you will see this shark fin sticking up here right behind the 32. You look here on the one that doesn't have it mounted in there, there is no shark fin right here, okay? And there is no arm right here, okay? So, now let me put a magazine in the gun. Watch the position of this arm as I insert the magazine. Okay, push it up. Now you see that arm raise up right here. I take the magazine out, you see the arm goes down, put the magazine back in, it goes up. Now look at the other side. I don't have a shark fin sticking up by the trigger bar. Now the shark fin is up when I remove the magazine, put the magazine back in, shark fin goes down. When the magazine's in, the trigger bar can move freely. When I take the magazine out, this shark fin comes up and there is an arm of it that comes across that blocks the trigger bar's forward movement. So the magazine disconnect safety just requires the magazine to be in. And because there is no resistance against the trigger bar when the magazine in, there is no resistance against your trigger pull. There's no gritty feeling. There's no extra weight of you having to do anything because it's completely disengaged. It is only in effect when the magazine goes out. I think that's a really cool benefit, especially as it is a retrofit option that you could put in or take out. I think about the P2000 SK as a really, really great, obviously both of these are excellent concealed carry options, but the P2000 SK being a really, really good one. And if I think about like my daughter, for example, and arming her with a gun, the likelihood that if she had to use a firearm in some kind of lethal situation, that the person that she's using it against is going to be of significant stature to overpower her is probably pretty high. So if she has the ability to, in those last seconds before being overpowered, dump her magazine and render that weapon incapable of being firing, I think that's an added advantage that other pistols, from H&K or other companies don't have. And maybe that moment of that bad person trying to figure out why they can't get the gun to fire is enough for her to, get herself out of that situation. It's an advantage that you otherwise wouldn't have. I think it's pretty cool. So if you want to order that from H&K, it comes in this kit. Here's your part number, 203029. Pretty cool. If you need help installing it, obviously I can help you as well. It does not come with any instructions, but it's relatively simple to get in, and you can remove it as well on the end. So pretty cool safety feature. That's your magazine disconnect safety. Okay, so now let's talk about one more feature, and then we'll move on to some really cool things about how the weapons are produced. I get a question a lot from guys about the decocker. Like, how is that safe? We've already shown how the catch prevents the hammer from impacting the firing pin when we do that. But how does the decocker work itself? On the P2000, it is actually connected to the sear. So normally an LEM sear is going to look just like this. It's not going to have this arm that goes back and is connected to this. When I push down on the back of the disconnector, just like this, pushing down on it, that causes it to pivot on the axle, and the bottom rotates towards the front. The bottom rotates to the front. It falls out of contact with either the cocking piece on the LEM guns or on the hammer itself on the DASA gun, allowing the hammer to fall. But again, it's safely caught by the catch. So that's how this works. And again, it's this arm and the channel that it fits in that is in the DASA guns, and that placement is not in your LEM guns. Okay. So that's how that works. Now let's talk about the manufacturing process. I think it's pretty cool. It's one of the things that H&K does so incredibly well. Let's talk about barrels first. I've got a picture here I'll showcase of the barrel blanks as they come in. Solid piece of metal, the best German steel that they can find. It comes in there as these blanks, and what's happened, they'll be inspected, then they'll be deep drilled through the center, and the mandrel for the polygonal rifling will be inserted into the center, and then they'll throw that entire thing into their hammer presses. This is done with 4 different hammers taking action, imparting 140 tons of pressure per beat and 1,000 beats per minute. And that will cause that initial barrel blank to lengthen out along the size of the mandrel, so that when it comes out for pistols, they can usually cut it so they get about 9 pistol barrels per blank that they put in. That process, the combination of the quality of the metal, the polygonal rifling on the mandrel, and the hammer forging process, creates really the best barrels that are out there for these production guns. It's why the guns are so reliable for so long. The length and the amount of rounds you can put through these guns and still be good from a barrel erosion standpoint is just absolutely incredible. But it also leads to the strength of the barrel when you have bad things happen. All too often, I'll get a customer who will contact me and they'll send me a picture, and their pistol is like locked back in some form like that, somewhere out of back. They're like, I cannot get the slide to go forward. And they'll send it to me, and I already know what's happened. I'll finally get the gun apart, and what you'll notice is a barrel that has a bulge in the center of it. There's a little bump right there, and that's where they've had a squib round, where one round, for whatever reason, did not have enough power to kick the bullet all the way out the barrel, and that barrel stopped somewhere inside the barrel. The owner did not realize that, and what happened, didn't hear the audible pop that sounded different than a normal round being fired, and then fired another round behind it. And that second round caused to dislodge the bullets that are in the barrel, but it also caused the barrel to get blown out. You can Google search this, yourself, squib rounds. You'll see tons of pictures of lesser quality firearms with lesser quality barrels, where the barrel is completely filleted open, the slide will be filleted open, the polymer receiver is destroyed, you'll see bloody hands, whatever. That just doesn't happen with these H&Ks. A lot of times I mean, H&K does this for their own testing. They'll just file down those rounded edges on the outside, put it right back in the gun, and go back to the range, and they'll prove that they can still meet their accuracy standards with that. And if you look inside the barrel, you just see it looks like a dirty ring of carbon. That's where the rifling was blown out of that one section, whereas another barrel would be completely blown out. That's the quality of their barrels. Here's an example of an almost finished barrel. So originally this was the diameter of the barrel blank, and then when they beat on it with the hammer pressing, it came out with this length here. You can see this is one for a pistol. This is actually for USP compact. This rear section would then go into a finishing process where they would create the chamber area and the locking lugs. But really cool to see the size and then what it gets beat down to through the hammer forging process. The other one is how they create their slides. This is a version of the second run of the slide. Initially, it's one solid piece of metal. Then they bring it in here. Again, this is for a USP compact. You can see some of the angles, and they'll start making those initial cuts. Okay. From there, you can see the next section here. You see they've drilled the hole for the firing pin block and the extractor. They've cut out the open for the top of the ejection port. They've got the firing pin tunnel. They've got the slide rails, your lightning cuts in here, so we can tell this is the initial cut there. So all the initial work has been done, and then you get your final product. So now here you've got your cocking serrations, and you've got your dovetails in there, and all the finished kind of work, your extractor areas cut out, your tangs done, and now to go to final finishing. This process is pretty incredible. Getting to see it last summer when we were at H&K Germany was really awesome. They actually have a machine where they can feed these things in, and it'll do the entire process, and they can basically like load it up on a Friday afternoon, and it'll have enough material in there that when they come back Monday morning, all this stuff will be done. But the quality of the materials and their manufacturing process means that these guns just withstand the test of time. They are incredibly reliable. When I think about from an armor perspective, would I recommend a P2000 to anyone? Of course I would. It's based off the original USP design. It's what's been carried forward with all these other ones. I just do not see issues with these guns. People send me firearms for upgrades and things, and sometimes I'm just cleaning weapons because people don't want to clean them. But I'm very rarely repairing something that is damaged. And if I am, it's almost always because somebody who didn't have the experience tried to do something to their gun and messed it up, and now I'm correcting their issues versus something else. There are very few trend issues with any of these guns as far as reliability on them. They just run, and you can pass them on down to your kids when you're done with them. So really huge benefit to their manufacturing design process. You can trust them from a reliability standpoint. As far as what we do with upgrades, as I mentioned, you've got the things like the magazine release. You've got things, obviously, tritium sights are what I would recommend if you're carrying the pistol or using it for home defense. The magazine release from the HK45 compact is one I would recommend. Additional magazines for greater capacity would be what I would recommend. And then obviously some aftermarket options. I get a lot of work in these days from the Gray Guns short reset kits and their flat triggers. Those are probably the most common upgrades that I see to these weapons and do those most often. Most people find those beneficial to lighten the overall trigger pull, make a presentation of the trigger a little better for their grip size, and then give you a more responsive reset for the trigger if that's what you're trying to do is sweet spot the guns. But I still think they meet a perfect little niche in the product line. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I believe these to be really the most underrated guns from H&K. And really, probably the biggest reason that is because of its time frame. If we look back at the USP when it came out, it was the beginning of 1993, and we didn't see the P2000 come out until really kind of middle to the end of 2001. Full production started in 2002. So almost 10 years of USP before we get P2000. And even though it had this massive successful law enforcement contract here in the U.S. and other places globally, there we are 2002. In 2006, just 4 short years later, we see the P30 released. And so already in that short period of time, the P2000 is really kind of overshadowed by the P30, which again, functionally is the same gun internally, almost. There are a few changes, but almost the same internally, but with some ergonomic changes on the outside. And most people, when they looked at one or the other, said, well, I'll just get the P30. I like this more ergonomic grip with these side panels I can change out, and it's got a full-length Picatinny rail, and it's got front cocking serrations, whatever the feature is on there. Maybe it was just it had more magazine capacity. Regardless, it was this short span of only about 4 years where it was already overshadowed by another pistol that I think just meant that it didn't get the attention that it deserved. But I know that there's a lot of guys, loyal fan base guys out there that really like them. And they've made a ton of them, so you can still find them on the market. But I will tell you, if you want a new one, you should be getting after it right now, because if you go and look on the H&K Germany site, it is not even listed anymore as an available option. In fact, it is only available here in the U.S., and the only reason it's still available in the U.S. and hasn't been discontinued here is because currently it's the only pistol from H&K that is on the approved list for California. So the majority of the ones that they are making, they are sending to California for our H&K fans behind enemy lines. And I would expect that we're going to see this one fall away here relatively shortly. Sure, you can go out and buy them on the secondary market. There's tons of them. But if you want a brand new one, this is probably the time you're going to want to go do that. And though you'll see some pretty good pricing on the used ones that are out there, I would suspect that just like anything else, once you can't get them anymore, you'll see those prices kind of go up. So I'm a huge fan. These are my 2 variants here for my own personal collection. This one here is one that I'm going to be presenting to my daughter as well for obvious reasons. But I think they are a great gun, especially if what you're looking for is a compact carry gun that is comfortable to wear all day and incredibly reliable and accurate. So I hope that covers everything. I'm sure I forgot to mention one thing or another through the video, but if you've got any questions or concerns or something else that I might have missed, please put it in the comment section. I'll be happy to answer it for you.
Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed the video. I know I did. Put it all together for you. Being able to share this knowledge and experience is always humbling for me. If you are in need of H&K service and support or unique training opportunities, give me a shout. That's what I'm here for. Thanks, guys.